Welcome to Newsnight. Across Nigeria, one aspiration unites us all: the thirst for development. Citizens everywhere are eager for both the federal government and the states to rise to the challenge of meeting the country's pressing needs. And while much of the spotlight often falls on the federal government, many argue that it is at the state levels that Nigerians should truly focus their attention. After all, how our states manage their finances is not just a matter for economists or policymakers. It directly shapes our daily lives. From the roads we drive on to the schools our children attend. Tonight, we turn to two reports: the Fiscal Transparency Overview for Nigerian States, looking at Q3 2025, and the State of States Report 2025. Together, they provide a wealth of data on how our subnationals are performing, whether they're driving progress or falling short. To help us unpack the insights and challenges these reports reveal, we're joined by a legal practitioner, development researcher, and a strong voice on public policy and accountability. He's the Deputy Country Director at BudgIT Foundation Nigeria, Vayala Kwaga. Thank you for being here on Newsnight. I think I would like you to start by telling us what your organization does.
Thank you so much for having me. So the BudgIT Foundation essentially is a civic tech organization. And by that, I mean it's an organization that blends e-government, citizens-facing technology, democratic strengthening, and citizens' engagement in a bid to not only improve the quality of our democracy, but to also ensure that citizens have information that they can use to go about their interactions with governments at all levels.
Okay, and how long have you people been doing this advocacy?
So we've actually been in existence since 2011,
okay.
So that would make us about 15 years, I think sometime towards the middle of this year.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, lovely. I want us to have a conversation because of two reports. I know you people have done a lot of reports, but two caught my eye, and I would like to start with, I think the first one is the 2025 Q3 Fiscal Transparency. How did you phrase it? Is it the
State Fiscal Transparency League Index?
Index.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I would like to find out what's that all about, so that for those watching, they will be clear what that report is based on.
Yeah, so thank you so much. The SFTL, I think, is maybe one of our less sung reports. It's also a flagship report that was birthed by our global director's view that the interesting work that the World Bank did through its SIFTAS, State Fiscal Transparency Program for Results, I beg your pardon, that worked towards ensuring that states had legislation, that states were able to publish and publicize critical fiscal documents. There was the belief that once the World Bank's program ended, it would signal the end of a lot of those documentations and publishing. So he thought that it would be interesting and a means to sustain that great work. Why don't we have a report that does basically the same thing and not only follows the states in terms of their publishing, but provides information to citizens? So in essence, the State Fiscal Transparency League Index measures the comprehensiveness, the availability, the functionality, the accessibility of state websites, specifically for fiscal information, so budgets, medium-term expenditure frameworks, budget implementation reports. We also have a subcomponent of the index that looks at e-procurement, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians would be interested in that because a lot of misappropriation happens there. But it is also the site of a lot of potential developments So we look at MTEF publication, citizens budget publication, e-procurement functionality. It's one thing to have a functional e-procurement website. It's another thing for it to be functional and accessible. Sure. So we then rank the states because we add weights to each of those indexes. So for MTEF, it has a specific score. For e-procurement, it has a specific score. And then we aggregate those numbers, normalize them, and score them over 100.
Okay, so your last reading, if I put it that way, was for quarter 3.
Was for Q3.
Q3 for 2025.
Yes.
So what were the key findings of that report?
So interestingly, more states are doing better in terms of providing information on budget implementation, in terms of medium-term expenditure frameworks, and the availability of e-procurement portals. In fact, I recall we didn't have any average performers. Most states generally did pretty well. We just had a handful of states that performed rather poorly, Rivers being one of them for obvious reasons. But we do see...
Obvious reasons, sorry, I'm not clear why that is obvious.
So the debacle between the state legislature and the governor has meant very little has been published in terms of their fiscal documents. So there really isn't much from Rivers in terms of critical public financial information, like an MTEF, for instance, or, citizens budget.
They used to be.
Yeah, it used to be.
Okay, so that's why you are placing it squarely on the...
Yes, on the bottom rung because of the lack of information. Okay. So where you are not able to provide this information that we score, you obviously would not get a
Yeah, but I'm saying you are laying this at the feet of the problem between the
political impasse. Yes, between the state legislature and the government.
Since they used to have it in place before. Yes. But continue, you were talking about your finding.
Yes, so, by and large, there's been some timeliness and improvement in timeliness in terms of citizens' budgets, in terms of budget implementation reports, in terms of, the state having a repository, a website, a functional website where you can, with your smartphone, go there, download a budget, go there, download a budget implementation report, and get a sense of where your state is fiscally and financially. Okay,
so looking at that now, you are happy with that?
I wouldn't say we are happy.
Well, you say more states are doing what they are supposed to do for citizens to be able to check.
Yes.
That should make you happy.
Well, Nigerians, by and large, including myself, are Oliver Twist in this case because it's easy to fall prey to the notion that transparency implies accountability. I'm afraid it does not. And while the states, by and large, can be credited for a general improvement in transparency and access to information, and even at that, there are problems with that conceptualization. Let me just digress before I forget. It's one thing to have an e-procurement website.
Yes.
It's another thing for you to have accessible contracts for download. But it's a third thing for you to have a bureau of public procurement that is an autonomous or at least semi-autonomous body that handles public procurement in the state. So states should not mistake them having functional websites to having people on the ground to do the actual work in a manner that is not constrained by excessive executive influence. Okay. If you look at, a broad swath of states, many of them do not have independent bureaus for public procurement. So it stands as a question, how then is procurement actually carried out? So that was just what I wanted to digress. The issue of transparency with public financial data does not imply accountability. And it's my hope and my dream that Nigerians understand this. Transparency is not synonymous with accountability. Transparency is about providing information, making it accessible. Accountability has to do with answerability and explanations or consequences for why a decision was made. So I can tell you that I spent 10 naira to get here, but accountability would then have me show you a receipt for how I came here or show you a Google map that showed how I got from my house to the office. And where I took a route that I was not supposed to, I would explain why. and tell you how I would remedy that and, you know, not take a longer route, thereby wasting more money. So we do publish this report to let citizens know that this information is available, but citizens need to take that step to actually use that information. It's unfortunate that the way our political system is structured, citizens have very little in terms of accountability or remedial mechanisms. Let me give you a simple example. We operate the separation of powers in Nigeria.
Yes.
The idea that we have 3 arms of government, they are meant to serve as a check and a balance to one another to prevent abuses of power. But what you have, by and large, is a legislature that is very, very weak. And this applies also to the federal level. You have a legislature, I mean, in the case of the states, I guess it's somewhat more grievous because the state legislatures, the state houses of assembly, perhaps do not recall that they are the true representatives of the people. They are the true representatives in the sense that the Western European system we borrowed from went through years of wars with kings, with dukes, with queens, with other monarchs to ensure that excessive power was not centralized in one person or one institution. And that parliament, that diet, that assembly is meant to check the executive. So ordinarily, the constituents should meet their legislators and ask them, hey, we saw that the state did not spend up to 50% as of Q2 2025 on health. Why is that? And then the state legislature will then call the governor or call the commissioner for health, because the Constitution empowers the legislature as the only body that has the preeminent power to summon a president, summon a governor, call for the production of any document. So, I mean, there are other issues. There's also the problem of a lack of a proper mechanism of accountability between state executives and citizens. It's not particularly clear how that relationship works, you know, but we have written and spoken about that, you know, many times. But the first port of call, which we think is seriously lacking, is the citizens' legislative, executive oversight function.
So let me take you back a bit, because from what you told me, or from what I understand, from what the financial transparency issue is supposed to be, part of it has to do with timely reports on implementation of the budget, right?
Yes.
So does that not give you some way of oversighting to be like, there was a plan to spend this was spent? Because I'm trying to get back to that. I like the way you phrase that thing, that transparency does not automatically lead to accountability, but it's the first step.
Absolutely.
Good. So, but I'm asking now that when you come to the issue of the fact that a budget is presented, a budget is approved, and then you have timely reports that say this is how it's performing, and that means we spent what we should have spent here, but we didn't spend it. Does that not help to also move accountability forward?
So it only moves accountability forward if the persons, the offices in charge of reporting, in charge of budget implementation,
Yes.
have a mechanism, have a platform, have a forum where they can take feedback from citizens, where they can provide detailed, understandable information to citizens, and act on the feedback from citizens, and act on the lapses, and act on maybe some mistakes that were made to ensure that the budget is credible. Because the perennial problem we have both at state and federal level is we have massive budgets and we have minimal execution at the end of the day. That's referred to as budget credibility, where your budget is not a reflection or is not reflected in implementation. And this has significant consequences for things like healthcare, education, water and sanitation, access to, income, and agricultural inputs. So yes, it does shift the needle in the sense that it gives people information or knowledge, and knowledge is power. But a sword is only as good as you using it and going to the battlefield. If you keep it under your bed, it's really not much of a sword.
From where you stand and from what the work you've been doing, how would you assess citizens' engagement with this reports and the tools that the states have put in place?
I mean, I guess even for this, I would say there's a lot to be desired. We are a nation of 200-odd million people. Let's assume that 70% of them are adults. So we should be having millions of hits, on our website, and also when we publish this data on our social media handles. But the engagement isn't as much as it should. I don't know if it's a function of political apathy, because sometimes when you're looking at numbers, it's hard for Nigerians to connect or draw a straight line from a poorly implemented budget to the fact that they don't have water, or a poorly implemented budget to the fact that their primary health care center doesn't have medicine, or a poorly implemented budget to the fact that a road that should have been constructed has been left unpaved for decades. So I guess we need to do a lot more to communicate more effectively, to make sure our work is accessible and understandable. But Nigerians do need to take that significant step and use this information.
Yeah, because if you look at it, when you come to the issue of needs, I want this road, or citizen wants this road done. You are not sure whether government is filling your need. Where do you check? Because it will be the budget, because the budget is where
at least the plan.
The plan, and where government's mind
is
stated, where they are concentrating. And if you see that there's a way you can check that, it obviously will mean there's a way you can hold them to you didn't put it in the budget, or you've put it in the budget. When is it starting?
Yes.
And all that. So I don't know, where do you place the issue? Is it that the people don't know? Or because maybe it should be that they desire it and they've not understood that it's made available.
So, I mean, I hate to bring this conversation back to the legislature, but this is primarily a function of the Citizens Legislative Compact. And, again, like I said, the legislature is the preeminent institution meant to hold the executive to check. So legislators should be on a regular basis consulting with their constituents, because that's how information passes from the constituent to the legislator, who can then call for the governor, who can then call for a commissioner, who can then call for the head of an agency and say, give us a report reaching back 2 fiscal years, bring us your monitoring and evaluation reports with photographs, with statistical data on how you have been implementing your agency budget or your ministry budget. Tell us what you have been going through. Some states, in some of our work, have told us that they have quarterly budget engagement sessions with the executive, but it's not clear how that translates to action. And that is primarily a function or an example of how the social contract has been destroyed in Nigeria, where citizens are unsure of who to even meet when they have a grievance or they have a problem with a need in their community.
I'm interested in the fact that you're focusing on the state, and I'm curious, what's the situation? What's the situation at the federal? What's it like?
So for information, I'm sure you are aware of the president has promised of our previous dalliance with having several budgets, at the same time. And for the Q4 2025 Federal Budget Implementation Report, for instance, this is a report that should coalesce 4 quarters of data. This is a report that should provide authoritative information on the financial position of the federal government as of December 31st, 2024. That document was marked provisional, because the federal government obviously hasn't closed its accounts. So what do you want an international financier or an investor to say when he tells his assistant to look for the budget implementation report of the Nigerian federal government? Let me see where they are fiscally. And they pull up a report and they see provisional. Or he asks them to look for the most recent budget implementation report for the 2025 fiscal year. By the way, that's the last fiscal year. We are in 2026. And they say, sir, the only report we can find is for Q2 2025. So the federal government isn't demonstrating a level of commitment. They are not demonstrating a level of, I don't want to say seriousness, because this is critical financial information that the laws, the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, provides clear stipulations for. So if you have a federal government deciding what it wants to obey and what it wants to disobey, what do you want a state to do? Or what do you want a local government to do, for instance? I'll round up this point by saying the same problem of a lack of citizens' legislative compact exists at the federal level, perhaps even in a more ridiculous way. And I'm speaking from first-hand experience. Not only is there poor communication between legislators, both at the House and in the Senate and their constituents, but even the states themselves have said in repeated fora that they don't even know or are aware of certain projects that their legislators are implementing in their states. So you have a state saying, a director in the Ministry of Budget and Planning telling me that we woke up one day and we saw one of our senators building a road somewhere. He never told us he was building the road. There was no communication as to what informed that road being sited there. So if state governments are having that issue, you know, what would the fate of citizens be?
There's sometimes a cross...
There's a very bad coordination problem.
So yes. Sometimes we could get funding, state will fund the road and maybe federal will...
Yes, yes. I mean, if you take a look at the budget, for instance, the federal budget, and you look at what we call the infamous budget insertions, it's clear that the Nigerian government, and I mean the states and the federal government, have very zero to minimal coordination in terms of infrastructure. And it's interesting because in previous administrations, I mean, whether or not they used the data, at least they had conversations. We had regular, at least yearly meetings, yearly convenings of the Joint Planning Board. The Joint Planning Board is essentially the states and the federal government, the state ministries of finance, the state ministries of budget and planning, and other key sector ministries meeting to discuss on how we can ensure that we work efficiently. If the state has budgeted X billion for health, the federal government can budget Y billion and work on, say, communicable diseases, and the state works on non-communicable diseases. Nigerians are yearning for better governance, and there are quick wins that the state and the federal can achieve, but there really isn't any clarity as to whether that's something they want to pursue.
Let me just ask this directly, because you made it clear from the beginning when you were talking about that Fiscal Transparency League.
Yes.
Now, there were certain specific documents that you look out for, and structures, websites and things. Do we have this at the federal?
Yes. So we have a medium-term expenditure framework. We have budget implementation reports. We have a Bureau for Public Procurement that has a website. We have had citizens' budgets. We've had publication of the budgets. We have the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Budget and Planning that have websites that warehouse this information. We have the Open Treasury platform that until 2024 December was probably the preeminent platform where daily spending data was provided. But for the entire 2025 fiscal year, almost nothing was uploaded by the Office of the Accountant General. This was an initiative of the late President Buhari's Accountant General, who put that website up to give Nigerians a sense of at least where overhead spending and capital expenditure was going. So you could see in real time, almost in real time, how much money was going out.
Wow.
So for 2025, there was nothing. 2026, from our last check, it seems like they're trying to bring, or at least publish, some old information. I'm not sure if they're publishing anything for 2026, but they are trying to, publish for 2025.
Okay, I've focused a lot on this report, but I'm really interested in the state of the states. I need to tell you, I like the way people phrase that. What shape are the states in? I think that's basically what the title was saying. But before we go too deep in, I need you to tell me, just as you did for the Fiscal Transparency League Index, how did you people go about framing? What are the things you're looking out for in this report?
So I must say that the state of states that is Easily Budget's flagship reports was the result of a random conversation between our then head of research, Atiku Samuel, and our global director, Olusegun Onibinde. You know, they were remarking on how there was very little information on the financial health of the states. And they said, why don't we look for the budgets and see how we can assess and analyze, you know, that and put it in a report form. And that's really how it was birthed. So the state of states essentially is a diagnostic tool that looks at a fiscal year. So the state of states 2025 looked at the 2024 fiscal year. So we have a few indexes that we put together, we normalize, and we score and rank states. One of the indexes looks at the ability of states to cover their operating expenses with just their IGR. Another index looks at IGR growth. The third index, I think that's Index B, looks at the ability of the states to meet their operating expenses, loan repayments, non-operating expenses using just IGR and FAC. Index C looks at debt. So debt as a percentage of revenue, debt in terms of foreign currency, etc. And the last index looks at how well the state is prioritizing capital expenditure. So if you look at all of those sub-indexes, you will see that we essentially look at fiscal performance as given by the states themselves. So what we use is the Accountant General's reports. And the Accountant General's report is another document that we rank and we analyze in the State Fiscal Transparency League table. So the law stipulates that the Accountant General's report, the audited financial statements, because the Accountant General's report is usually not audited, that audited financial statement should come not less than 6 months after the end of a fiscal year. So the audited financial statements for 2025 should come out at least by July of 2026. So it's a backward-looking report. We cannot analyze a current fiscal year because it isn't over yet. But the state of states, by and large, I think has shown Nigerians that there's a lot that states are doing, and there's a lot that Nigerians should be interested in.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break.
Yes.
What makes this year interesting? So I would like to hear what makes this year interesting.
The fact that Rivers was absent.
Okay.
And again, we use public documents that have been audited. And we did not get the audited financials for Rivers State. So Rivers usually comes in second or third, at the very most first sometimes. But due to its absence, we had Anambra first, we had Lagos second, we had Kwara third, we had Abia fourth, and we had Edo as fifth, you know, top five. The bottom five, I think Plateau, I think Jigawa and Yobe, if I'm not mistaken, form part of the bottom five. But it was interesting because it shows just how sensitive the ranking is to big performers like Rivers that have massive capital expenditure components that, you know, bloat the size of their budgets. So, I mean, if I'm going to speak about the findings, we saw a lot of growth in revenue, and that was largely due to FAC, Federal Account Allocation monies. We saw...
Which some we say is due to removal
of subsidy. Yes, and it's important that we stress that fact because between 2023 H2 and H2 2024, states received more in FAC in, that's 18 months. They received more in 18 months than they had received in the last 5 fiscal years. States literally got trillions of naira more. So we saw a growth in FAC. We saw an uptick in IGR. Of course, the state of states, I have to stress this for Nigerians, is a statistical analysis. So it is sensitive to large performers like the Lagoses, the Rivers, the states that spend a lot. And it can hide information or it can distort your view of what average performance really looks like. I think another takeaway that was important for us was debt. Debt is growing, but at a slower rate, and that's largely due to debt held in foreign currency. Another takeaway was contingent liabilities also rose. So a lot of judgment debts, a lot of contractual obligations, are still being owed by states by and large. In terms of capital expenditure, we did see, some meaningful increases, but again, you'd have to read the report to look at the specifics and see which states are actually prioritizing capital expenditure more. Lastly, I would say we saw larger health and education budgets, but we saw lower implementation. In fact, by and large, on average, states implemented just 60% of their health and education budgets, and that is simply not good enough.
As against for infrastructure, what was it? They did more of infrastructure than...
So if you think about infrastructure as a standalone,
yes,
states allocated more to infrastructure.
Yes.
But in terms of implementation, because we looked specifically at implementation, for the 2024 fiscal year, and we saw that states were not implementing as well as they should have. We didn't look at capital.
This is interesting. So here we have, correct me if I'm wrong, more money coming in, which ideally should mean you have more to put into things.
More impact.
Yeah. But now we're having budgets that are not still being funded.
We're having bigger budgets, we're having lower performance.
And you would assume that since there was more money, you budget to what you have. Is there any way from your reading you could understand what was going on?
So it would take you thinking in terms of development planning.
Okay.
And this is why a medium-term expenditure framework, for instance, is important. This is why a state development plan is important. We don't expect states, government is very serious business. We don't expect states to, as we say in Pidgin, do anywhere belle-face governance. That it's in one fiscal year you focus on health, the next fiscal year, you change your mind. 6 years down the line, you change your mind. There must be deliberate, structured, evidence-based monitoring and evaluation that informs the implementation of public policy, that informs spending, that feeds into the development of plans, that helps you see at the end of a fiscal year, we got this wrong, we got that wrong, we need to monitor this better, we need to spend better here, and that informs how you budget for the next year. So it's an iterative process that should be sequenced, that should be deliberate, that should be evidence-based. Some states publish plans, but it's not clear how those plans connect to an annual budget. It's not clear how those medium-term plans connect to their medium-term expenditure frameworks. So budgeting is not all there is. Budget implementation reports are not all there is. An audited financial statement is not all there is. There have to be metrics, there have to be goals, targets, objectives that can be addressed by money, that can be implemented by the state civil service, that can then speak to proper implementation, better budgeting, better spending, and improved livelihoods.
And
we really don't see that. It's not the case that states go out to do this in a technically grounded, evidence-based fashion that carries citizens along. We do not see the state houses of assembly critiquing, questioning, disturbing the state executives to improve the livelihoods of people.
So even where we have governors who have like 8 years, you're saying within that timeline, it's their own timeline, they still do not, their planning does not look like it's coordinated.
I don't really get a sense of coordination, because you should be able to have a plan. You were put there by the people.
Yes, and you want to impress. You want to show you've done something.
Unless you weren't put there by the people and you got there through bribes and through rigging, then you probably wouldn't care. I don't know if you are, but...
Let me go back to what I think a lot of Nigerians will be asking, because there's this perception that states can do way better. Because if Nigeria should develop, a lot of people believe it shouldn't be from the federal down. It should be from the states. And it's really nice to hear from what you're saying that a lot more different states are coming into the first 5 from what you said, which should mean that states are doing better. But I want to hear from you, as you look at that report, what is the state of our states?
So the state of our states is a picture of states getting a whole lot more money but states not performing as well as they should. It's a story of 36 individuals that have not demonstrated that they want to align with national development priorities or to be held accountable by their citizens. And, I'm sorry to get technical, but this is a conversation about federalism, if we're being honest.
Okay.
When you look back at who created the states in Nigeria, they're all creations of military governments.
True.
And that's because creating a state under a civilian government would probably be extremely difficult, as we have seen, in the years that have gone by.
Yes.
The agitations for state creation, it usually never results in much, because there's a lot that needs to be said about the viability of our states. So one of our indexes, or one of our findings, looks at what we call the dependency ratio.
Yes.
So how much do states use of their own IGR for their budgets as opposed to FAC? What is the proportion of IGR to FAC? And we see that 50% of states relied on federal account allocations for more than 70% of their total expenditure. So that shows you that, are states really viable? In recent memory, I can recall when the federal government had to bail out states.
Yes.
In fact, if you look at the audited financial statements of some states, you will still see arrears for federal government loans. We can't have a functional democracy. We can't have GDP growth where states are still, to a very large extent, dependent on the center. Now, that is a political question. We have to look at how the structure of our federalism. Is the center too heavy? If you look at the exclusive legislative list, 60 items, I think it's a lot. Constitutional amendments should look at how the federal government should even want to, let go of some of these things. If I were a president, I would want to let go of a lot. Lighten the federal government, put the pressure on the states, put that load on the states, let them sort themselves out. And as the federal government, you focus on currency, maritime issues, foreign relations, defense, and let states, or maybe health and education, let states worry about the rest.
Yeah, but are you saying that, even understanding as you do, that the states are not doing much with the one that they've been given?
Yes.
The little they've been doing, they're not doing, from what you're saying, they're not doing what they should. And you want them to have more?
So my response would be, are we going to continue doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result?
Okay.
It may be, democracies allow you to experiment. And that's one of the beauties of liberal democracies. You can experiment with a new political party. You can experiment with a new political individual. You can experiment with a regional coalition. Democracy affords you the power to experiment. In 2027, I call on Nigerians to experiment, with the voting process.
Because when you look at it, one of the things I think a lot of us were happy about when the law moving the issue of power generation.
Exactly.
I
thought I would see.
Everybody assumed that, boom, everything would just.
But it was disappointing.
Till now, we've not seen much. Now, I'm asking. I would like to find out from you. You do know that there's still agitation for more states.
There will always be agitation for more
so
states.
What do you say to that? Because I know right now there's a budget, there's the amendment process going on, and there's people pushing states. Would you say more states? Because the push for states usually is that it helps development trickle down. What would be your position to more states in the country?
I would say absolutely not. I think states need to, by and large, demonstrate they have the capacity. And we should not have the Lagoses constantly being number one in terms of spending. We should have other states look at their internal capacity. We should have other states working on their human capital development and understanding that the road to success is challenging. But when sacrifices are made by those in power and they demonstrate that they are interested in raising the bar, I think citizens would contribute and collaborate and pay their taxes. It's one thing for the states to want better revenue or more revenue or improve their own IGR. But what is their tax regime like? It's clear that if they are not interested in taxing people at the state level and are waiting for FAC, you cannot have development without taxation. And taxation pushes people to ask questions. You're taking more money from me. What are you doing with it? I will not leave your office, Mr. State House of Assemblyman, until you tell me what you're going to do with my money. I'll not leave your office, Commissioner for Health, until you tell me what you're doing with our tax monies. So the whole thing is tied together. And until we can separate the feeding bottle federalism, I hate that phrase, until we can separate states from the teeth of the federal government,
yes,
I do not see the need to create more states.
Okay, but if you then look at it, like I say now, I'm also asking, looking at that issue of federalism, where do you see the local government? Because right now it looks like we're still just talking two-tier. What does this say when you look at those figures for the local government? We're still trying to push.
So the local government question is a complicated one. I was listening to, I think, Channels the other day, and the interviewees were talking about the Osun State issue.
Yes.
And it turns out that the federal government is paying local government chairmen directly. Osun is the only state that is experiencing that. I'm wondering why other states are not when we have a subsisting court judgment, but maybe that's by the way. So it's not clear where local governments actually reside in terms of an authoritative, authentic tier of government. Why I say so is because if you look at the Constitution talks about an exclusive list, a concurrent list, and a residual list. So are those residual items exclusively for the local governments? Because states have encroached already on those powers and that scope. If we look at some of the subsidiary legislation, like the Control of Finance and Management Act, I can't recall, but it was in the 1960s or 1970s. It's a legislation that lots of people don't know about. It's in that law where you have states being mandated to provide 10% of their IGR on a quarterly basis to local governments. Is there any reporting on that? Lastly, let's talk about budgeting. Is there any legislation that mandates local governments to publish their budgets? I don't know if there is. If there is, I would love to see it. So are state governments ensuring that there is a credible PFM, public financial management regime at the local government level? The answer is probably no, because we all know what state governors do with local governments. They're
very comfortable with the way things are. I would like to just ask this, because there's some states I'm sure will be like, no, now, why we're generalizing.
Rolled into.
The whole report looks gloomy. I want to ask you, if an investor is coming to Nigeria and you want to look at some of the states that you feel have the potential to stand on their own, which states would you say they should look at and why?
Well, I would be very, very wary of answering this question.
Okay.
So it would look like financial advice.
Okay.
But from our report, of course, the top performers, the Lagoses, Kwara, Anambra, Abia, and Enugu have shown that they have the capacity to improve their IGR. So why those states are in the top 5 was as a result of how they performed in the indexes. So maybe they grew their IGR well, or they prioritized their capital expenditure, or they managed their debt well, or they were able to settle their recurrent obligations with their IGR. So you do need to look into the reports to get a real insight. But the top 5, I think, by and large, I mean, Lagos clearly.
Your report says
it's always shoulders above.
But I really like the fact that it looks like 3 southeast states.
Yes.
Came up into.
So Enugu, Abia, and Anambra.
Usually it was Anambra.
It's usually just Anambra.
Anambra that used to be there. Yes. So it says something.
Yes.
Even though it means, I think Kaduna lost out.
Kaduna lost out, yes.
Because Kaduna too used to be
within the top 5. Kaduna is still in the top 10 though.
Yeah,
I can't recall what position precisely.
But they lost
they lost the top 5.
So it's a mixed bag in some ways. We have some things to cheer about, but we would really like to see a lot more fight for the top 5.
Absolutely.
Good. But let me put this question to you. If you were to have the privilege to be before the president and the National Economic Council, which is made up of all the state governors, what reforms, if you were to do like 2, 3, what would you see that you think will help them rejig the way we're going to put us on the path of development as it should?
I mean, the first thing I would say is, Your Excellencies, I may say things that might offend you, but please let me leave here alive. No, I'm just joking. I mean, the first thing I would say would be about coordination. Policy coordination is extremely difficult because you are not only working with institutions, you are working with persons, you are working with personalities, you are working with incentives, you are working with structures. So there needs to be a clear line of sight that unites subnational development objectives and federal development objectives. You may want to call it over-centralization, you may want to call it a form of communism, but I think we need better central planning. By central planning, I mean a coordination of states and the federal government for infrastructure. For heaven's sake, the federal government and the states should be aware of who is responsible for Trunk A roads, who is responsible for Trunk B roads. There should be an infrastructure plan where states say, we will work on Trunk C roads and state roads, federal government focus on Trunk A. So infrastructure, same thing can be applied to health.
And the federal legislator will not come and that wants to show he's doing something in his constituency on a Trunk B road.
So you understand.
Will not come and then fetch the federal or use his constituency project without coordination with to come and be doing a road that they don't know about.
Exactly.
I was just trying to illustrate.
Yes, it was a brilliant example. I think the second thing I would lay before them is the issue of public financial management. There needs to be significant improvement, and Nigerians will hate me for saying this, but two contrasting things can be true. Yes, we can have a civil service that is largely inefficient, but that civil service is poorly remunerated. That civil service has very low capacity. That civil service doesn't understand and is not being carried along in the relationship between them and political appointees. So there's a constant tension, and this happens at both subnational and federal level, between civil servants who implement public policy day to day. So these guys are the ones that get their hands dirty in development. And then you have political appointees that formulate policy, them and the legislature. We would like to see better coordination in terms of policy formulation and policy implementation. So civil servants that have the institutional memory are a respected and respectable cadre of people who are professionals that are working for the same reason politicians vie for office, because they want development.
And not that they will come in, put them aside, and be trying to put things. Let me push you to the final point. You know, in the relationship of state, there's a part of government, there's a part of the citizen. Now, we've tried to a large extent talk to the parts of government, the part of people who formulate and who implement. But there's a part for the citizens. So if you were to talk to Nigerians now, what would you be saying to them as regards trying to see that we have a society where the citizen has more role to play going forward?
Again, I'm going to say something that would sound very unpleasant to most Nigerians, but the change you want to see is a direct result of how much you're willing to put in. Are you willing to skip a day of work to attend a local government council budget session? Are you willing to stand on the road and protest in front of your state governor's office for improved water supply? Are you willing to support media organizations, many of whom are underfunded, to report better, with better detail, with better interviews on the issues that matter to you? Now, again, two contrasting things can be true. Nigerians can be so politically disempowered that they see no reason or no purpose for participation, for voting, for asking questions. But another thing can be true in the sense that the society will not change until citizens understand the role they are meant to play in a democracy. Like I said, democracy is an ongoing experiment, and citizens are the scientists. The elite is 0.0% of the total population, so citizens should understand that there's power in numbers. Please do not look at ethnicity, please do not look at tribe, please do not look at religion. you have a common destiny with your neighbor, with your friend, with your colleague, with another person in another state, and where you're able to work together cohesively, you will see the results at the end of the day.
And society moves forward better. I'd like to thank you for spending your time and talking to us about this report.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
There's certainly a lot to unpack. As we strive as a country for the development we firmly believe we deserve, it's clear that much remains to be done. From the federal government to the states to citizens and yes, even to the media. Each of us has a role to play and a responsibility to ensure that Nigeria is governed in the way we want it to be governed. So at this point, I say thank you for staying with us. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed. Bye.